Everyone talks about Legolas like he was the perfect elf. Cool, calm, impossibly skilled, firing arrows with flawless precision while sliding down staircases on a shield like it was completely normal Tuesday behavior. And sure, on the surface he seems totally comfortable in his own skin. But if you actually dig into the lore, if you look at what Tolkien was really building beneath the surface of the story, a much more complicated picture starts to emerge. Because there is a strong case to be made that Legolas, son of the elven king Thranduil, had every reason to feel a deep and complicated form of jealousy toward Aragorn, son of Arathorn. And not the petty kind of jealousy either. We are talking about something rooted thousands of years deep in elven history, in the wounds his people carried, in what his father taught him to believe about the world, and in what Aragorn represented that Legolas could never have, no matter how many centuries he lived or how many enemies he killed. So today we are going to break this down completely. We are going to go from the ancient grudges of elven kindreds all the way to the Fellowship of the Ring, and by the end of this, you are going to see Legolas in a way you never have before. This is not the story of a perfect elf. This is the story of a prince carrying invisible weight. Let us start at the beginning, because you cannot understand Legolas without understanding his father, and you cannot understand Thranduil without understanding where he came from and what was done to his people. Thranduil was not just any elf. He was the only elven ruler of the Third Age who officially bore the title of king. Think about that for a second. Galadriel was referred to as a lady, Elrond as a lord, but Thranduil was a king. That title meant something to him, and it was not an accident that he held on to it so fiercely. His people, the Sindar, had been betrayed in the most devastating way imaginable by the Noldor, the High Elves who came back from Valinor in the First Age. The Noldor had slaughtered kinsmen of the Sindar to steal ships, then marched into Middle-earth and set up their own kingdoms without asking permission, basically walking into someone else's house and rearranging the furniture while the owner was still standing there. For Thranduil's people, this was not ancient history they could simply move past. It was a wound that kept bleeding through generations. And then, as if that were not enough, when the Noldor came after the Silmarils, their own obsession and their own wars, kingdoms of the Sindar were destroyed in the crossfire. Thranduil and his father Oropher fled east as refugees. They did not leave their homeland willingly. They were driven out by the consequences of someone else's choices. And when they finally settled in Greenwood and built something new, when they gathered the local woodland elves and established a realm worth protecting, what happened? They were pulled into the last alliance against Sauron, a war called by Noldoran leaders. And because Oropher refused to take orders from Gil-galad's commanders and insisted on fighting independently, the Mirkwood army was surrounded. Half of them died, including Oropher himself. Thranduil survived, but he came home with a fraction of the warriors he had brought. He had lost his father and most of his people in a war where elves of high lineage got to give the orders and his people paid the price. Now, raise a child in that environment. Teach a prince about those wounds. Show him what happens when his people trust the wrong leaders or defer to the wrong authority. Tell him the stories. Let him feel the weight of every grave, every abandoned city, every name of a fallen warrior. That is how Thranduil raised Legolas. And that inheritance matters enormously when you try to understand the Legolas who shows up at the Council of Elrond. Here is where things get really interesting, because the Council of Elrond is where Legolas first truly encounters Aragorn as a significant figure. And from the very first moment, everything about Aragorn would have landed differently on Legolas than it landed on the others. Aragorn is Dúnedain. He is the heir of Isildur, which means he carries in his bloodline the legacy of the kings of Gondor and Arnor. He is a man. He is mortal. He has lived maybe 80 years at this point, which to Legolas is not even a warm-up. Legolas has existed for centuries. By any measure of experience, any accumulation of years, any depth of memory, Legolas has Aragorn utterly outmatched. He has seen things that happened before Aragorn's entire civilization existed. His father's people have been shaping the fate of Middle-earth since the First Age. And yet, Aragorn walks into that council, and within moments he is being talked about as the hope of the free peoples. Gandalf speaks of him with reverence. Arwen, Elrond's own daughter, the most beautiful elf in the world at that point, has pledged her immortality to him. Not to an elf, to a man. A mortal man who will age and die within a century. The prophecy of the king points to him. The shards of the sword Narsil, the blade that cut the One Ring from Sauron's hand, are being reforged for him. Every room Aragorn walks into, history bends toward him. The entire arc of the age has his name on it. Now imagine being Legolas in that moment. You are a prince. Your father is a king who has protected his realm through impossible odds, who has kept his people alive through every catastrophe the Third Age threw at them, who did what no other elven ruler managed to do, which is hold the line when everyone else faded or retreated. Your people have been fighting Sauron's forces in Mirkwood for generations, suffering casualties that never made it into anyone's official records or histories. The War of the Ring did not start when the Fellowship walked out of Rivendell. For Mirkwood, the war against the Shadow had been going on for decades, centuries even. Thranduil's realm was on the front lines, while Rivendell and Lothlorien sat behind their magical protections and held councils. And yet when the moment of history arrives, when the defining choice of the age is made, who steps forward as the central figure? Not a Sindarin prince, not anyone from Mirkwood, a man, a mortal. The heir of a human kingdom that fractured and collapsed because Isildur could not bring himself to destroy the ring when he had the chance. That last part is worth sitting with. Isildur's failure is arguably the reason the War of the Ring has to happen at all. If he had cast the ring into the fire at the end of the last alliance, Sauron would have been finished. The Age of Elves could have transitioned peacefully. Instead, Isildur kept it, was killed by orcs, and the ring was lost for thousands of years, allowing Sauron to slowly rebuild his power, which directly caused the shadow that consumed Mirkwood, which directly caused the suffering of Thranduil's people, which directly shaped the grief and the burden that Legolas inherited. And now the grandson of that lineage, the heir of the man whose weakness caused all of this, is being crowned the hope of the world. Do you see what is happening here psychologically? Do you see the layers? Legolas has every rational reason to feel that history is profoundly unfair. His people did everything right. They sacrificed everything. They held the line without any of the famous weapons or the rings of power or the legendary status. And the reward for all of that endurance is to play second fiddle in the story of a man. Not even a remarkable man by elvish standards, at least not in terms of years or accumulated wisdom. Remarkable by human standards. Yes, absolutely. Aragorn is extraordinary. But the gap between what Aragorn has and what Thranduil's lineage has invested in this world is not even close. Now let us go one layer deeper, because this is where the jealousy gets genuinely complex and genuinely painful. It is not just about status or recognition, it is about belonging. Aragorn, despite being a ranger who has spent decades hiding his identity, despite being exiled from his birthright, despite carrying the heaviest possible burden, belongs to the world in a way Legolas does not. Aragorn has a future in Middle-earth. He is going to become king. He is going to build something. He is going to stand in Minas Tirith and watch the sun rise over a realm that is his, with a queen he loves beside him, with children who will inherit what he built. He is bound to Middle-earth by mortality, yes, but that bond is also an anchor. He is not leaving. Elves are leaving. That is the whole trajectory of the Third Age. The elven rings are losing their power. The great elven lords and ladies are sailing west to Valinor. The world is changing in ways that no longer have a place for elves in it. Even Thranduil, who resisted that tide longer than almost anyone, even he knew that his realm had an expiration date that Aragorn's did not. And Legolas, through the entire Fellowship journey, is moving toward a choice that will define his eternity. Whether to stay in a world that is slowly becoming not his, or to sail west into a blessed realm that is safe and beautiful, but that represents, on some level, an admission that his time here is over. Aragorn gets to belong completely. Aragorn gets to be the hero of the story in the most literal sense, the king who comes home, the man who wins. Legolas gets to be incredibly useful, and then watch the chapter close on a civilization that his father's people helped protect for thousands of years, and then sail away from it. Tell me that is not painful. Tell me that an elf who has lived for centuries and felt every moment of his people's suffering would not feel something complicated about watching a mortal man step into the role that elven sacrifice made possible. But here is the twist, and this is the part of the story that makes Legolas genuinely compelling rather than just tragic. He does not let the jealousy win. And you can see this in how his relationship with Aragorn actually develops across the story. Because in the beginning there is absolutely a distance there, a kind of measured quality to how Legolas relates to him, a sense that he is evaluating rather than simply trusting. That is not accidental. Given his father's history with men, given Thranduil's bitterness about men in general after what he witnessed during his wandering years and during the last alliance, Legolas would have absorbed a very specific wariness about placing faith in human leaders. And yet something shifts. You can trace it through the journey. The moment at Amon Hen when the Fellowship breaks, the way Legolas fights at Helm's Deep not just with his famous skill, but with what you can only describe as genuine ferocity, like someone who has realized this matters personally. The relationship with Gimli, which is its own entire psychological story, because befriending a dwarf means breaking from another inherited prejudice, which means Legolas is actively doing the work of dismantling what his upbringing taught him. Every step he takes toward trusting Aragorn, toward acknowledging that this man is genuinely worthy of what history has given him, is a step Legolas takes against the grain of everything Thranduil raised him to believe. That is not a small thing. That is not background flavor. That is a character actively choosing who he wants to be in the face of 1,000 years of reasons to choose differently. Think about what it costs Legolas emotionally to stand at Aragorn's coronation and watch a mortal man be crowned King of the Age. Think about what it means for him to feel genuine joy in that moment if he does, and the evidence suggests he does, because he is there. He stayed. He fought for this outcome. He did not have to do any of that. He could have gone back to Mirkwood after Helm's Deep and reported that the South had sufficient defenders and his father's realm needed him. He did not. He stayed because somewhere along the journey, the mission became real to him in a way that transcended the politics of it. And that is the final piece of the jealousy puzzle, the one that ties everything together. Legolas is jealous of Aragorn not because he wants to be Aragorn, but because Aragorn represents a kind of wholeness, a complete belonging to a story, a place, a future, that Legolas can glimpse but never fully hold. He is jealous of the certainty. He is jealous of the anchor. And maybe, buried underneath all of that, he is jealous of the simplicity of a life that ends, that has clear borders, that does not stretch on into an indefinite future where you have to keep watching everything you love transform and fade and pass away while you remain. Immortality is not uncomplicated. Legolas is living proof of that. His father built an entire kingdom on the foundation of grief and loss and stubborn pride. Legolas grew up knowing that love and everything it builds is temporary for everyone except him. Aragorn will age. Aragorn will die. Arwen, by marrying Aragorn, has chosen to become mortal too, which means even the elves who belong to this new age will not outlast it. But Legolas will. He will watch Gondor rise and fall in the fullness of years. He will see generations of Aragorn's descendants grow old and die. And then he will sail west, leaving behind a world that his people helped save, but could not remain in. There is a version of jealousy that is not about wanting what someone else has, but about recognizing that what they have is something you never could, no matter what you do. That is the jealousy Legolas carries. It is not bitterness, or at least it does not have to be, but it is real. It is written into the bones of his character when you understand where he comes from, what his father taught him, and what watching Aragorn's story means against the backdrop of everything the Sindar and the Wood Elves of Mirkwood sacrificed across 3 ages of Middle-earth history. So the next time you watch the movies or read the books and you see Legolas doing something impossibly cool with a bow or a shield, remember that beneath the composure is a prince who grew up in a kingdom built on grief, who inherited centuries of grievance and loss, who watched a mortal man step into the center of history, and who chose, despite all of that, to stand beside him anyway. That choice is not trivial. That choice is actually the most heroic thing Legolas ever does, more impressive than any acrobatic archery, more meaningful than any impossible kill count. He chooses to believe in something larger than his inheritance. He chooses to let go of the weight his father carried. Whether Thranduil ever understood that choice, whether the Elven King of Mirkwood ever looked at his son and recognized what Legolas had worked through on that journey, that is a story Tolkien never quite tells us directly. But if you read between the lines, if you sit with the history and feel the weight of what both of them carried, you get the sense that the healing was real. And that makes both of them, the king who remembered every wound and the prince who chose to see past them, genuinely extraordinary figures in a mythology full of extraordinary figures. If you want to keep going down this rabbit hole, there is so much more to explore about the politics of the Elven kingdoms and how those ancient feuds shaped every major decision of the Third Age in ways most people never notice. Hit subscribe and leave a comment below telling me which character from Tolkien's world you think is the most underrated or the most misunderstood, because I have a feeling this community has some seriously deep opinions on that question. And honestly, I am here for every single one of them.